X-Men is a superhero franchise that has spanned comic books, Saturday morning cartoons, and Hollywood cinema, grossing over $3 billion worldwide. Central to the story of the X-Men is the Mutant allegory, where Stan Lee's easy way to avoid having to write more superhero origin stories has evolved to represent the struggles of minority groups. The X-Men are mutants, individuals born with extraordinary powers, but instead of being recognised as superheroes by the world they live in, like Spider-Man or Captain America, they are sworn to protect a world that hates and fears them. Because they were born mutant, the humans, the normal people, antagonise them, and this is where the X-Men go beyond a superhero team and become a metaphor for acceptance. Since their introduction in 1963, parallels have been drawn with the civil rights movement, as the X-Men's mentor, Professor X's view of peaceful cohabitation came into conflict with the villain Magneto's more aggressive, anti-human agenda. Professor Xavier vs. Magneto and Martin Luther King vs. Malcolm X have been controversially compared, as it glorifies the former by vilifying the latter. This is indicative of an anti-Islamic narrative. The Christian fighter for civil rights is praised at the cost of a Muslim fighter. In more recent depictions, the mutant allegory has progressed from that of race to one of sexuality.
Ollie, have you tried not being a mutant?
Similarly, the dated, simplistic portrayals of good and evil dissipated along with its sexist portrayal of female characters, and that's roughly where I was introduced to the X-Men. From an early age, I was exposed to this franchise by my mother, and I believe the liberal ideologies and metaphor had a significant part in my socialization. While I can hardly say that allegory was what influenced me to watch the cartoon as a kid,
I cannot be defeated!
I feel that I found myself empowered due to the franchise's representation of the outsider. My interest in geek culture and articles such as superhero cinema and comic books caused me to feel alienated in my youth due to the stigma attached to being a geek or a nerd. Thus I developed different personas, one introverted where I could pass by without risking interaction with those I felt uncomfortable with, and one where I could be passionate and excited about geek culture with those whom I did feel comfortable around. Similar to what Goffman suggested in his dramaturgical model, I masked myself in the way I saw fit for particular contexts. Now I was particularly fond of one character before others, Cyclops, the tragic leader who was in constant fear of his own power. He was characterized with growth and determination, not challenging to the conventional order, but working within it, which I felt a connection with in my youth. Having been taught to accept the given nature of things through my family and the education system, to see a hero still outcast, but upholding the notions of a dominant ideology, reaffirmed the structure which I believed in. In terms of representation, the construction of the Caucasian, heterosexual male as the heroic leader caused me to feel empowered, and communicated an ideal to strive towards. X-Men would also have a negative effect on my approach to others, however. In the early 2000s, a comic book writer called Grant Morrison took over writing the flagship X-Men title. He would minimise the emphasis of the mutant allegory and also create John Sublime and his trans-species movement, the U-Men, a group of humans who felt mutant at heart and would murder mutants in order to claim their powers. A clear villainous group. A feminist reading would be that what's being communicated here is a vicious message about transgender people, and while it does not straight out condemn them, the positive metaphor for acceptance that so many people associate with the X-Men is lost. Even with Grant Morrison having left the company, there remains no transgender representation. This is in the franchise that brought mainstream comic books first gay marriage. This is in the franchise that has constantly been at the forefront of accepting people, regardless of who they are. So what does it communicate when a text on acceptance does not accommodate the transgender community, even vilifying them at one point? Understandably, this has a terrible effect, one which disregards the entire notion or validity of being a trans person, and works to support the dominant ideological view of a gender binary. To my shame, this idea of there only being two genders was something that I ended up buying into. If it wasn't for actually meeting trans people and hearing their perspective, it is likely that I may never have escaped from having such a heartless view of that culture. Safe to say, the X-Men or mainstream superheroes in general had no intention of shattering this perception. I have felt a definite sense of empowerment being an X-Men fan, as in geeky conversations it provided a sense of elitism. It has always been incredibly easy to take the high ground, as even the movies provided something more thought-provoking than usual superhero affairs. By having this extensive knowledge on a matter I considered more important than the matters being discussed by my peers, I felt more confident. However, with most people I would keep this passion hidden away in my private self. Even now I do not introduce myself to people I have recently met as a comic book fan, as the connotations it has for many people would create a poor first impression. For many people, it is indicative of someone who has failed to meet the expected male gender roles of athleticism and financial success, and people have an image of greasy, overweight losers who operate out of their parents' basement.
Oh, loneliness and cheeseburgers are a dangerous mix.
While a ridiculous stereotype, it is still one that I acknowledge that many people may associate with myself, even if I do not match their preconceived notion of the expected aesthetic. Despite all this, I do feel that being exposed to this metaphor of acceptance consistently from such a young age has truly helped to shape my identity and the perspective I have today, even if it was merely a stepping stone to constructing my own liberal ideology.